for being here.
I am the manager at the Adelaide Hunter Hoodless Homestead, and the Adelaide Hunter Hoodless Homestead is a nationally designated historic site here in St. George, Ontario. And in that role, I curate the museum and also manage the site itself, the community events and the rentals that happen here.
You've been with the museum for
2 years. I was part of the community and did some volunteer work at the community, and of course, had my own career that is separate and apart from heritage sites. But I was drawn into the museum because I attended some things here and really loved the place, learned the story of Adelaide, and found it a compelling story. And I found her a compelling and interesting person because she accomplished so much that still affects the lives of Canadians and yet is not well known. And when I spoke to the people at the museum, and one of our local politicians connected us because he knew that I had done some community work, and it was very clear to the people who own the museum, who are the Federated Women's Institute of Canada, that having a historic person to curate the museum only is not entirely what is needed. What is also needed is someone who can bring the place to life, bring the community into the site and to the museum, and really allow the people in the area to feel like it's their own. And so that they can, celebrate wonderful times here, show their art here, come and attend functions, we have some weddings here. We've also had a celebration of life here. We have a children's program. We have some seniors activities, really for the whole family. It's quite a understated, rustic, rural, peaceful environment. It's quite pretty. And then, of course, it has the added benefit of the heritage site and the historic museum. Yes?
Let's talk a little bit about Adelaide Hunter Hoodless, her
Yes.
beginnings and how she became who she is right now. She was born in a modest family. She married a relatively well-off man, and one of her children, a boy, died due to some contaminated milk, and she blamed herself.
Yes, it's true. Adelaide was born in this house, actually, where we're doing the video is the house that Adelaide was born in. It was her childhood home. Adelaide was the youngest child, the 12th child of David and Jane Hunter. And at 24 years old, Adelaide married a man named John Hoodless from Hamilton, who was the son of a wealthy family who had a furniture manufacturing company. And they had 4 children, and as you stated, their youngest child, also named John, died at 14 months old of what was then called summer complaint. What we now know is milk contamination. And so it was not uncommon then for children to die in that infant and toddler stage of life because they were overwhelmed with the bacterial content of milk, particularly in the way it was processed, but also in the way it was stored. As you mentioned, Adelaide was devastated by this loss, and I think to some degree felt that it was a senseless and needless death. Of course, as had all of the other children whose lives were lost to the same type of illness. And so she started gathering information about it and started writing a book about it, really joining the dots and making the correlation between milk and the safety of that product and how it's used and the death of these children. Actually, everything Adelaide did after the death of her son John was to safeguard other families from not suffering the catastrophe that her family had suffered. Partly because she was well connected with a well-known family that afforded her some opportunities to connect with people, and gave the work that she did some notoriety and some power, and partly because of the way that she was raised and the mother that raised her and the person that she was, quite a strong woman, raised by quite a strong woman. When we look at Jane Hunter's obituary, it speaks of her. This is Adelaide's mom. it speaks of her as a cheerful disposition and also a woman who was well read and politically aware and a good conversationalist. And I am fairly sure that those words were not echoed in very many women's obituaries during that time period. Jane Hunter was widowed only 8 months after she had her youngest child. And, she had 12 children and a large farm to manage. And she did so at quite a good standard because the census shows that there was another family that lived on this property and they were here to help with the farm. Only fairly successful farms were able to do that. Jane's older children had worked with their dad enough before his death that they were able to keep things going. And of course, with Jane's support and guidance, it was still a successful venture. Adelaide was able to go to finishing school, which was a school that she attended sort of after the one-room schoolhouse that most girls attended and that completed their education. Adelaide was able to go on and do more. And it was in that experience that she met John Hoodless, who was the heir to the Hoodless furniture manufacturing company in Hamilton, Ontario. And as you mentioned, they had their 4 kids and their youngest child, John, died. That launched her public career. And in that time period, all of the things that she did were to shine a light on this problem and try to correct it. And so she wrote a book. That book eventually was picked up by the Canadian government and used to write the curriculum for what we know as home economics. I don't think it's called home economics anymore. I think it changed from home economics to family studies. And now I think it's broken down into different subjects that can be taken. But for all of us women that grew up in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, home economics was a standard in schools, and it was there because of the work of Adelaide Hunter Hoodless. She also was credited for establishing the YWCA. So it had started, but it wasn't taking off. And Adelaide used the YWCA as a place where she could teach domestic sciences to women. And so there's actually a picture in the archives of a class being taught at the YWCA in domestic sciences. The YWCA gained notoriety within the community because of those domestic sciences classes. And of course, we all know the YWCA and YMCA now, and just what an important feature that is in our daily life in our community now. She also, together with Lady Aberdeen, who was the wife of the Governor General, started the Canadian arm to the Victorian Order of Nurses. So it had been well established in the United Kingdom, but they started it in Canada. So we know the Victorian Order of Nurses as nurses that go and visit elderly and infirm people. However, at that time, it was started for nurses to go and visit farming families. So it was to support the rural community. Because, of course, if you had someone who was sick in your family, it was devastating to shut the farm down for a whole day to try and take your child or whatever member of your family needed medical attention into a city or a town nearby in order for them to get attention. And so this was a real game changer. Nurses were going out to farms and helping rural families and bringing medical access to them for the first time. She wrote this book, gathered this information, and started working with the agricultural community and was introduced to a couple named Erlin and Janet Lee. They were from the sort of Stony Creek area, just in sort of the east end of Hamilton. And they were well connected with the agricultural community. And Adelaide worked with them to talk about dairy farming and milk and the process that was used, joining the dots with these illnesses that babies and toddlers were having. And so they decided to have a meeting inviting women to talk about this. And that became the first Women's Institute meeting. At the time, it wasn't called the Women's Institute. It was called the National Council of Women, but it is what we know today as the Federated Women's Institute of Canada. That was the first meeting. That was 127 years ago. There was 100 people at that meeting. Could you imagine getting 100 people at a meeting in short notice without social media, without the benefits of social media? That started it. And as we know, the Federated Women's Institute, people think that it started in the United Kingdom because the Queen of England was a member of the Women's Institute, but it didn't. It started here with Adelaide Hunter Hoodless and Erland and Janet Lee being the co-founders. And later, the Canadian government did mandate the pasteurization of milk in Canada. And so they began to see a decline in the incidence of this summer complaint or milk contamination. It's hard to think of another Canadian woman that has, made such significant contributions. She also worked with Sir William MacDonald and encouraged him to provide the funding for the MacDonald Institute at the University of Guelph. And that is an institute whose intended use was to teach rural women, domestic sciences, and it still stands today. There is an original oil painting done by a Canadian artist of Adelaide Hunter Hoodless that hangs in the MacDonald Institute now. There's lots of other accomplishments, but to be honest, what really strikes me, of course, all of those accomplishments are remarkable, and even more remarkable is the fact that she accomplished those really through grief, working her way through grief, through the loss of her infant child, a loss that she believed was preventable. We have all lost someone in our lives that we love very much and know just how difficult it is to even get up and keep moving the next day. But to be able to leverage that grief and trauma in your life and transform that into meaning and purpose that brings such tremendous change and positive results that can be shared throughout the country is really remarkable, and particularly remarkable for someone who most people don't know who she is. And I'm trying to change that. I'm 2 years into trying to change that. That's really important. The other thing is that she lived, accomplished all of these things, and died before women even had the right to vote in Canada. When I say it was an uphill battle,
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's interesting that although she did promote women's education and advanced a lot of knowledge, she was not a big promoter of women's right to vote.
I've heard that sentiment echoed before. She was not a big member of the suffragette movement. I understand that. This is only my opinion and the way I personally look at it. At that time, it was believed that the husband's vote represented the vote of the family. And I can tell you that her husband, John Hoodless, entirely supported everything that she did, connected her with the right people to help her efforts be as powerful as they could be. And they were completely aligned on the good that they were bringing forward as a result of the death of their son. I think with that type of family support, it is agreeable that the husband's vote may be the vote of the family. And perhaps she didn't take that on for that reason. Or perhaps she didn't take that on for the reason that she was engaged in bringing the Canadian arm of the Victorian Order of Nurses, or establishing the YWCA, or starting the Women's Council, or really being an educational reformist in providing the information for the curriculum for home economics to be taught in schools. I hear what you're saying, and I've heard it before. And my responding thought is, it's always surprising to me that we're looking at what she didn't do in light of what she did do and how unknown it still is.
Very few acknowledge her as a scholar
Mm.
because she wrote a textbook. She was teaching. I'm sure if she was teaching, she was organizing curriculum. She was communicating and exchanging a lot of views with
Mhm.
academics. Do you think she has her deserved place in history?
No, my sense of it is that she isn't. She doesn't have her preserved place in history. She is recognized as a woman of historic significance. She was honored by a Canadian postage stamp in 1993. I think at that point she was only the 11th woman in Canada to be recognized with a postage stamp. Of course, now I think that there are over 100. In the 1800s, society didn't do a very good job of recognizing the contribution of women. And I think it's fair to say a number of people, particularly men, maybe were not comfortable with her being on a podium, attracting hundreds of people at speaking engagements and teaching and informing, because that isn't something that women routinely did then at that time. There's always a dichotomy between her magnificence and how intimidated people were at that time with her strength. You know, she was ahead of her timing, of course, as lots of great people are. I don't think even today people realize what she did and how important it is. And I don't think that they see how it shows up in their day-to-day life. And that all lives on because of the Women's Institute. You know, I'm telling people all the time, are you aware that when you pull up to a railroad crossing and there's that arm that comes down in front of your car so that if someone hits you from behind, you won't roll onto the train tracks and be hit by a train? That arm is there because the Women's Institute made a resolution to the Canadian government requesting that it be there. I could list another 20 things that are there because the Women's Institute made a resolution to the Canadian government that their focus may very well be rural women and children, but most of the time, the improvements that they request the government to implement serve all Canadians. The goodness that she does continues on with groups like the Women's Institute. And here at the Homestead, we keep the lights on and we keep the doors open by continually having community events. We make sure that those community events honor the legacy of Adelaide Hoodless and make sure that they are in keeping with being wholesome, family-oriented, educational events, really just to honor her legacy.
What could we do as women
Mm-hmm.
to keep her legacy alive?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, be educated by it, understand what she did, how she accomplished it, when she accomplished it. I'll tell you something interesting, or that I found charming. There was a family that came through here for a museum tour, and I have them sign the register, and the man's last name was Hoodless. And so I said to him, "Are you any relationship to John Hoodless?" And he said, "Yes, actually, I am." This man may have been somewhere between 75 and 80 years old. This isn't Adelaide's relative. This is Adelaide's husband's relative. And so I said to him at the time, "Do you know anyone in your family who remembers Adelaide and John?" And he said, "Yes, I do. In fact, my mother remembers her grandmother saying that the family wished that Adelaide would just go home and shut up and look after her kids." So even her family herself was not comfortable with the role that she had as a teacher and as an informer, or someone who informed people about how to live their lives more safely and more healthfully, really. Her own family didn't really even support her entirely. And you can imagine, as the mother of a child who died from something like contaminated milk, how hard it would have been for someone like Adelaide to hear those words, that her husband's family wished that she would just stay quiet and stay home and look after her kids. Because, of course, the underlying message there is, you had a child that died. But it was in fact the death of her child that motivated and energized her to do all of the things that she did. So for women today, I think knowing her, understanding her, allowing what she did to resonate in your own life. I mean, I think many of us can think of grief that we've had and the possibility of something that good that could come out of it. Many of us can think of a time where, we had a hunch that something was dangerous, but didn't take the extra step to gather the information and talk to people about it and raise awareness about it. And even really just the importance, reconnecting with the importance of a healthy homesteading life where you really are intentional about the food that you eat and what you provide your family and the goodness of it all. I think for everyone who looks at all that she did, whether it be the Victorian Order of Nurses or the YWCA or the educational reform or any of the Women's Institute, certainly women are joining the Women's Institute all the time now, and those groups are still all across Canada, still doing good things for the Canadian population. Anything from joining the Women's Institute to just how you apply these principles in your own life. Certainly, when you hear Adelaide's story and you allow yourself to appreciate everything that she did, it will mean something different to everyone. And that's the beauty of it. You pick up what resonates with you.
This was a labor of love. She was not,
Yeah.
compensated.
No,
So
no.
in contrast with today, when a lot of people think that for everything they should be compensated.
Yeah.
And she did everything truly from the goodness of her heart and from her sense of responsibility, not the sense of guilt. It was her sense of responsibility.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That's a really important point, isn't it? It wasn't born out of sense of guilt. It was sort of born, I think, out of an intention to bring good into the world. And that goes back to the way she was raised, really, and the people who raised her. Her parents were Irish immigrants who settled in Canada, had 12 children. They were a farming family. Certainly, I see it even in this community still to this day. There are families who've been here for generations and generations and generations in our farming family, and they are down to earth, really hardworking, very community oriented, God-fearing people who just go about their lives in a way that it's clear they intend to do good things for people. When that's the fabric of your nature, I think anything is possible. I believe that was her purpose in life. Unfortunately, it took the death of her son to sort of launch her in that direction. We'll never know what she would have accomplished in life had that not happened. But certainly, she was able to navigate tremendous emotional pain to a place of meaning and purpose and usefulness that continues to go on and benefit Canadians today.
When people visit your museum, what can they see?
Yeah. So we're sitting in 3 acres here, all pretty much laid to lawn. There's an outside pavilion. There's on-site parking. We are accessible, have a ramp. We have an indoor washroom and an outdoor washroom. That's all important for people who want to rent the space. We've started having weddings here, which are really lovely. When you come in, you will be coming into the national office of the Federated Women's Institute of Canada, and just sort of a very humble sort of kitchen and reception room and a couple of offices. And that's where we really sort of tell the story of Adelaide. We have some classes here and things like that, but we really sort of tell the story of Adelaide so that the tour that they're about to take has a little bit more meaning. And then we begin the tour, and the tour is of a house attached to this room I'm sitting in that was built originally in 1830 by a man named John Bray, who was a veteran of the War of 1812. And he had the house for almost 20 years with his wife and family. He built the home. You enter the home in a pantry. And then there are 3 reception rooms on the main floor and 4 bedrooms upstairs. It's an old farmhouse. It is full of artifacts that beautifully depict what life would have been like in the 1850s to 1870s, which is the time that Adelaide lived here. So the Federated Women's Institute of Canada bought this property in 1959, so 66 years ago, and they were the ones that sought out the designation as a National Historic Site and were able to raise the funding to decorate the house sympathetic to the time period of when Adelaide was raised here. That's what it is. It is a historical museum that tours like we lived in the 1860s. There are other activities, and they're basically centered around community for the events. And then we also rent to people who live in the town, people who live outside of the town, for any sort of occasion. Um, and then we have community activities. For instance, we have in April coming up on Good Friday an event called Easter at Addie's. It's only $5 a person, and kids get an Easter egg hunt and leave with a bag of goodies like chocolates and candies and whatnot. There's a petting zoo that's here. We quite often have a face painter. We quite often do an Easter craft. And people just sort of wander around the 3 acres and go from activity to activity. There's a hot chocolate station and people in Easter costumes that you can have a photo booth picture taken with. It's just a lovely day. We start at 10 o'clock in the morning and finish up about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We do the timing of that because Good Friday for a lot of people is a religious day, and most of those religious services happen at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we finish up at 2 so that people can still go to those. So that's really our single largest fundraiser event of the year. We have 2 or 3 events every single month. And then we have some bigger events that we're really excited about this year. We are doing a play called Skater. The play was written by playwright Vincent Ball, who is a local journalist, and also produced and directed by Peter Muir, who is the artistic director of Brant Theatre Workshops and Grandview Theatre. And they are working together on this play that we are going to debut in July, the beginning of July, July 5th weekend. In the community, we have a wall on the outside of one of the commercial buildings here, and the wall has a mural on it of Adelaide and the Homestead. So when we do the play, we're going to do some of the plays here on the site, but we're also going to do a couple in the town, in the village rather, in front of that mural. And we're going to close the street off for that on a Sunday afternoon. We're really looking forward to that, and it's a really interesting play. Vincent Ball, who is a playwright, explained to me that when you do a play of a historical figure now, you don't just sort of do a chronological depiction of that person's life and accomplishments, that you sort of marry it with a common day character who has some similar struggles. And you weave the historical example of how those struggles were navigated with the common day, the present day example of how those problems are navigated. And it just worked out to be a beautiful play that features an Indigenous girl who also had some family tragedy in the same way that Adelaide did, and how she navigated her way through that using Adelaide's story as an example. Sort of like the movie Julie and Julia, it was really about Julia Childs and how she became such a popular celebrity and cook, and this young girl that lives in New York and her struggle to also sort of accomplish the same type of thing. So that play is called Skater, and it starts July the 5th here at the Homestead, and we're really looking forward to that. The other thing we're working on that's really cool in September, we're having what's called a site-specific theater. It's going to be, I think, on for a week or two. And what that is where you use the site to actually be like a character in the theatrical performance. So what we're doing is the museum will play a big part in that. So people will come for a tour and there'll be, a wine and cheese sort of reception, and then they'll begin the tour and they'll put headphones on. And in the headphones, as you travel through the museum, what you will be hearing is either audio from historical archives or audio that we have created based on the research that we've done on those historical occurrences. And so as you move through the house, you'll be hearing stories and sounds of what you would have heard if you were living during that time. We'll also have people here in the house dressed in period costume. So it will be a really rich and wonderful sort of historic event. So we're looking forward to putting that on in September as well. And then we have all of the things that we usually have every year. We'll have something around Mother's Day, usually a high tea. We always have an opportunity for our local artisans to come and sell things here at an event. We participate in Apple Fest, which is an event that St. George has every year in September, where we have thousands of people that come to the village, and there are vendors and all sorts of bands and things like that going on. We also have a concert one Thursday night of each month in the summer that people can come to, called a musical stroll. And then we have a kids' summer day camp as well for a couple of weeks in the summer. And the theme is always pioneering. So kids learn how to live like they did then. Last year, one of the things that we did, we had 7 or 8 kids, I think, at this one week, and we made bread in the morning with them. And then we put some cream in a jar, and we played each child's favorite song just through a speaker attached to my iPhone. And the kids would shake the jar that had cream in it for the duration of their favorite song, and then pass it on to the next kid who would shake it for the duration of their favorite song. And around it would go to the 8 kids. And of course, 16 minutes later, we had butter in the jar. So we pressed it out using cheesecloth and added a little bit of salt and churned it a little bit. And then we used that with our fresh bread that we had made that morning. And we have a beef hive here on site. And so we're able to harvest our own. We have a local beekeeper that harvests our own honey from our own bee site. So the kids absolutely loved eating the bread that they had made with the butter that they had made and the honey that came from the site here, as just a lovely morning that we had as part of our summer day camp for kids. We do really try and keep things sort of wholesome and aligned with the pioneering spirit of a place that is a heritage site.
We also have the function of a wedding chaplain, and these
Yeah,
weddings can
yes,
take place here.
yes, yes. I do weddings that take place everywhere, but I do weddings that take place here for sure, and I love that. I became a wedding chaplain a few years ago, and I think, maybe next to this one, it's got to be the best job in the world because everybody's happy. You're celebrating a milestone in someone's life. It's a happy time. Particularly with COVID, I think people had gone through so much and not been able to gather as a family and really celebrate life's milestones. So, it has a real sweet tone to it, that now we can have, 30, 40, 50, sometimes more people gathered together to celebrate a wedding. I'm really happy to do that. So I meet with a couple first and we talk about their wedding. We introduce them to local vendors here. So there's a couple of women in town that have a flower farm. Amy right now is the person doing flowers for that. We have a couple caterers that we work with that really sort of offer excellent food at a great price. We have a decorator in Brantford, Party Kit Rentals. She does beautiful decorations for weddings. So we introduce people, local wedding people, to the vendors that we have here in the community so that we can help stimulate our own economy within the community. And of course, I am a person who lives and works in St. George, and I'm a wedding officiant. And so I help them write their ceremony as well. And so they can come here and have a wedding on the site in this beautiful rustic rural location with a local officiant to help them with a beautiful wedding ceremony, and then have a meal and have some music and have it decorated and have beautiful fresh flowers that are in season and locally grown. What we offer is really a wonderful opportunity to have a wedding at a reasonable cost. And there's a real niche for that. There's a lot of people who want to get married and aren't getting married because the average wedding costs $20,000. We just designed a wedding for a couple that cost less than $6,000. And they're having 45 of their friends and family, and they're eating and having a cake and having a lovely ceremony and really celebrating it just the way they want to at an affordable price. We're really happy to be able to bring that to people who might want to do that.
When do they start the summer hours?
We're open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of every week. And in the summer, at the end of May, we're able to have more hours because we typically get a grant that allows us to have some summer students. So we don't have regular municipal funding at all. We are a federally designated site, but we don't have any federal funding. And we have gotten some municipal funding in times of emergency, but we don't have regular municipal funding. We do get regular funding from the Women's Institute, but that is an aging group, and the membership has shrunk a little bit. So that's challenging as well. So we really try to do everything that we can to generate our own profit and funding. And doing weddings is one way that we can continue to do that. There are some books and some brochures here and a little bit of merchandise that is dedicated to Adelaide and the Homestead if people want to come in and visit. If you're in the area and you would like to come in and visit, our email is info@adelaidehoodless.ca. Please just let us know that you're coming. You don't have to come on one of those days. If we know ahead of time, we can make sure that someone is here. There's lots of people from the Women's Institute that volunteer here as well. So if you can only come on a Monday afternoon, just let us know and come when you can come. I guess what I want people to know is not to forget. I guess I would ask people not to forget how wonderful it is to have access to heritage and history within your community, and that needs to be supported, particularly in a place like Brant County or Brantford, that people really know of because of the Gretzky family, let's say. There's lots of sports and there's lots of sporting activities and sporting places to go. But there is also lots of history and heritage here as well. There's the Alexander Bell Museum in Brantford. Well, they are in a different structure in terms of municipality, and they're quite well supported. And there's a lot going on there as well. But, if you want to take a trip out this way, it is rich in community and history and heritage. There are some beautiful museums in Paris. We're here in St. George. There's another place called the South Dumfries Historical Site in St. George as well, and then the Alexander Graham Bell Museum. So you can really make a beautiful little day trip or couple of days trip and really have an opportunity to touch base with the heritage and history of this area and nationally significant historic sites as well. Yeah, this is typically what we give to people. Do you see Adelaide there? Yeah. There's two very popular quotes by Adelaide. One of them is, "A nation cannot rise above the level of its home." So the idea there being, if what we're serving our family at home is not healthy and wholesome, then the family can't do better than that. And she went on to not just nutrition, but her book also includes frugality of the home, just, the overall wellness of the home type of thing. The other thing is that she said, educate a boy and you educate a man, but educate a girl and you educate a family. because the whole family benefits, right?